Welcome back. I want you to imagine something for a second.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine a single building that serves as a literal time capsule. And we aren't just talking about a place that's been around for a few decades or even a couple of centuries.
Right.
We are talking about 1,500 years of continuous history.
That is a massive scale.
It is. It's a single location that has silently witnessed apostolic missions, incredibly bloody medieval border wars, and the kind of, urban commercial revolutions that actually build modern cities.
Yeah.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into exactly that kind of place. We've got a massive stack of research in front of us, all centered around a comprehensive historical text with a very academic-sounding title.
It's quite a mouthful.
It really is. It's called The Ecclesiastical and Sociopolitical History of Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church, Enamavu. Now, I know that sounds like it might be a dry, heavy read, but the stories buried inside this text are wild.
Oh, absolutely wild.
We're looking at alleged ancient miracles, legendary warriors, sweeping royal decrees,
And massive cultural rebellions.
Exactly.
It really is a treasure trove of human history. And the mission of our deep dive today isn't just to recount the timeline of one ancient church in Kerala, India. We are going to use this specific parish as a lens.
Right, zooming out.
Yes, by looking closely at Enamavu, which is also known in the texts as Enamakkal. Just for clarity, we can actually watch how human migration, royal patronage, and centuries of cultural synthesis shapes the modern world.
It's fascinating.
We'll see how early communities adapted to extreme, hostile environments and how massive global geopolitical forces trickled all the way down to affect the daily lives of people in a single village in the Thrissur district.
I love that approach. So, to start, we have to go all the way back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
The apostolic roots.
The first century.
Right. There's a section here detailing the early Christian community in Kerala, tracing its lineage back to the arrival of St. Thomas the Apostle in 52 AD at the ancient port of Muziris. And the text references something called the Thomas Ramban Patu. What exactly is that, and how does it fit into this origin story?
So the Thomas Ramban Patu refers to these ancient traditional ballads or oral songs that were passed down through generations. They function as a cultural memory for the local Syrian Christians.
Sort of an oral history.
Exactly. And according to these traditions, after arriving in 52 AD, St. Thomas traveled to a place called Palayur. At the time, Palayur was this bustling, prosperous hub filled with Jewish and Brahmin settlements. And this is where we get the foundational story of a miraculous encounter.
Or the water miracle. I was reading this part and trying to visualize it. The archives note that St. Thomas witnessed a group of local Brahmins performing their morning ablutions, which involved throwing water up into the air as part of a ritual.
Yes, and according to the tradition, St. Thomas issues a public challenge.
Just right there on the spot.
Right there. He tells the crowd that he can keep that water suspended in the air simply through prayer. He performs this act in the name of the Holy Trinity. The water supposedly stays suspended in midair, and this display deeply moves the local population.
I mean, you would be moved if you saw that.
You definitely would. It leads to a massive wave of conversions, and St. Thomas goes on to establish what are historically known as the 7.5 churches.
And Palayur was one of those primary foundations.
It was.
It's an incredibly cinematic origin story. You have this thriving established community on the coast, safe and prosperous. But then the timeline jumps forward to 510 AD, and the archives show this community suddenly packing up and moving inland to found the Enamavu Church. Okay, let's unpack this.
Because it seems counterintuitive.
It does. Leaving a highly developed coastal trade hub to walk into an unmapped inland territory makes zero sense to me. Why would they voluntarily do that?
On paper, it definitely looks like a terrible real estate decision. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this wasn't just some random wandering into the wilderness. It's actually what historians identify as the second wave of Christian expansion in India. You have to look at the evolving economic ambitions of these early Syrian Christians who are often referred to in the historical texts as Nazranis.
So they weren't being pushed out by invaders or fleeing persecution.
Not at all. They were transitioning. For centuries, these Nazranis had been primarily coastal merchants. They were heavily involved in the lucrative spice trade, moving goods across the Arabian Sea.
Which was highly profitable.
Very profitable. But to build true generational wealth and societal stability in the ancient world, you needed land.
You needed to own the means of production.
Precisely. You needed to control agriculture. So they were essentially trading their merchant ships for plows. They specifically targeted the hinterlands, moving into what are called the coal lands of the Thrissur district.
Let's pause on that for a second because we should clarify for the listener. When we say coal lands, we aren't talking about nice rolling green pastures, are we? We're talking about severe punishing wetlands.
We are talking about highly volatile, waterlogged floodplains. Much of this land actually sits below sea level. It is an environment where water dictates absolutely everything about your existence.
Which makes their survival even more baffling. I want you, the listener, to just imagine the sheer adaptability required here. You leave a comfortable coastal city and you arrive in a flooded swamp. How do you even begin to set up an agrarian society in the mud?
It required an astonishing level of technological skill and ecological engineering. To farm those coal lands, the Nasranis had to master complex hydrological systems.
They were basically terraforming.
They were. They were building massive earthen bunds, draining standing water, and timing their entire agricultural cycle to the chaotic rhythms of the monsoon season. And Enamavu itself is actually situated near a very critical natural regulator that manages the water flow between the backwaters and the agricultural plains. By moving there, they figured out how to thrive on a highly specialized mix of backwater fishing, waterborne trade, and intensive paddy cultivation.
So they built a booming agrarian economy from scratch. But historically, whenever an isolated group gets really wealthy and transforms a landscape, bigger empires usually start paying attention. Did that happen to Enamavu?
Oh, it absolutely did. By the medieval period, Enamavu was no longer a quiet, isolated farming village. Because of its wealth and its strategic location on the backwaters, it found itself sitting right on the highly fluctuating, extremely violent border between two expanding geopolitical powers.
The Zamorin and the Kingdom of Kochi.
Exactly. You had the Zamorin of Kozhikode pushing down from the north and the Kingdom of Kochi pushing up from the south.
The archives paint a pretty grim picture of this era. The Zamorins were constantly trying to push south toward Thrissur to control those vital backwater trade routes that the Nasranis had developed. And Enamavu was basically ground zero for these turf wars.
Yeah.
Agrarian farmers suddenly found themselves living on the front lines of an expanding empire.
It was incredibly precarious, and the local Christian population didn't just sit on the sidelines. They were deeply involved in the military structures of these local kingdoms.
That brings up a fascinating story from the text. There's a dramatic anecdote about a massive battle at Enamavu between the Zamorin and the king of Kochi. During this skirmish, the army chief for the king of Kochi is killed in combat.
Right.
Now, this warrior belonged to the Thatil clan. And the texts note that the Thatil clan was one of the most prominent Syrian Christian families in the region, a family that actually claimed direct descent from those original Brahmins baptized by St. Thomas back in the 1st century.
The lineage is amazing.
So this high-ranking Christian warrior dies fiercely defending a Hindu king. What happens next?
The king of Kochi is profoundly moved by this warrior's loyalty and his ultimate sacrifice. To honor him, the king makes a sweeping royal decree. He vows to construct a brand new church right at the site of this warrior's burial.
And that burial took place in a nearby area called Pazuval.
That's right.
And that royal promise leads directly to the founding of St. Antony's Forain Church in Pazuval in 883 AD.
Which is a fascinating turning point for the whole region. This raises an important question. How does secular political warfare actually redraw the religious map of medieval Kerala?
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, prior to 883 AD, the Christians living in Pazuval had to travel all the way back to Enamavu for their spiritual needs. Enamavu was the undisputed central parish, the maternal foundation for everyone in that territory.
But suddenly, a Hindu monarch's military campaign and his personal gratitude literally create a new independent Christian parish out of thin air. It's a wild intertwining of church and state.
It really is. The king is exercising direct demographic influence over the religious geography of his Christian subjects. And Pazuval wasn't an isolated incident.
No.
Enamavu continued to act as this massive engine of demographic growth. We see another significant offshoot later in the 9th century when members of the Enamavu congregation migrated to Arambur to establish the Arambur St. Anthony's Church.
It's like Enamavu was this massive ancient oak tree, and all these other regional parishes are its acorns, sprouting up across the landscape over the centuries.
That's a great way to put it.
But despite all this organic growth and wealth, Enamavu was about to hit a massive existential identity crisis. Here's where it gets really interesting. I was looking at the name of the church itself in our sources. We are tracking the history of Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church.
Yes.
But wait a minute. We just established this church was founded in 510 AD by East Syrian Christians who used Syriac and Aramaic as their liturgical language. Our Lady of Mount Carmel is a very distinctly European Latin title.
It is.
The Carmelite order didn't even exist in Europe in 510 AD. So how does an ancient Aramaic-speaking farming community in India end up with a European Carmelite patron saint centuries before the Carmelites were even a thing?
It's a brilliant historical puzzle. The short answer is that the name is a scar from a very turbulent period of European missionary activity and forced cultural assimilation.
Okay, walk us through that.
To understand this naming paradox, we have to look closely at the timeline. For its first 1,000 years, Enamavu and the other Syrian Christians of Kerala were in close communion with the East Syrian Church, also known as the Church of the East. Their theology, their language, their art, it was all deeply rooted in Eastern traditions.
Got it.
But that entire ecosystem gets completely upended in 1498 with the arrival of the Portuguese.
And the Portuguese didn't just want to trade spices. They brought a very rigid European perspective on how a church should be run, didn't they?
They absolutely did. The Portuguese initiated a grueling period of forced Latinization. They looked at these ancient Eastern practices and basically deemed them incorrect or heretical because they didn't match the Roman standard. This cultural friction culminated in the Synod of Diamper in 1599. At this synod, European bishops forcibly brought many of these ancient independent parishes under the jurisdiction of the Roman Catholic Church.
I want to make sure the listener grasps the gravity of this. This wasn't just a minor administrative update. What did Latinization actually feel like for the people sitting in the pews at Enamavu?
It felt like cultural erasure. The Portuguese, heavily influenced by the Jesuits at the time, were burning ancient Syriac manuscripts. They were altering the traditional architecture, changing the vestments the priests wore, and forcing the local clergy to adopt Latin liturgical norms.
Wow.
They were telling a community that traced its faith back to the 1st century that they had been doing it wrong the entire time.
That is a recipe for a massive backlash. You can't just walk into a wealthy, established community that survived taming the coal lands and tell them to erase their heritage.
And they didn't accept it quietly. Decades of simmering tension finally exploded in 1653 in what is known as the Coonan Cross Oath.
The famous rebellion.
This was a full-blown religious rebellion. Thousands of local Syrian Christians gathered around a stone cross in Matancherry. There were so many people that they had to tie long ropes to the cross so everyone could hold on to the rope and simultaneously swear an oath that they would never again submit to the authority of the Jesuits or the Portuguese bishops.
An absolute rupture.
Yeah.
So how does a rebellion of that magnitude lead us to the Carmelites?
Well, the Vatican realized they had a massive schism on their hands and that the heavy-handed Portuguese approach had backfired spectacularly. To settle the dispute, Pope Alexander VII intervened directly. In 1656, he bypassed the Portuguese and sent 2 groups of discalced Carmelite missionaries to Malabar to act as peacemakers.
One group traveled by sea and another took a perilous overland route, right?
Yes.
Talk about a high-stakes diplomatic mission.
Yeah.
They were walking into a deeply fractured, hostile environment.
It was incredibly tense. But the Carmelites acted as a sort of compromise between the fierce independence of the local Syrian traditions and the hierarchical demands of Rome. This mission eventually became permanent, establishing what would later become the Archdiocese of Varapuja.
Okay, I see where this is going.
It was under the influence of these specific Carmelite missionaries that Enamavu, along with many other ancient Syrian churches, was finally integrated into the Catholic hierarchical structure.
Ah, so as part of that peace treaty, essentially, they adopt the branding of the diplomats.
Exactly. They adopted Carmelite patron saints as a symbol of this new alignment. That is the exact mechanism of how a 6th century East Syrian foundation took on the 17th century European title of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Unlike later foundations in Kerala that were actually built by the Carmelites like the Varapuja Basilica in 1673, Enamavu fundamentally predates the order.
It is an ancient Syrian core wearing a European Carmelite name tag.
Perfectly said.
It's just wild to think about. But it shows their incredible pragmatism. They compromised on the name to preserve their community. And that sheer adaptability is what brings us to the late 18th century and a massive shift in the local demographics. Let's fast forward to the era of Shaktan Tampuran. Who was he? And why is he so important to our sources?
Rama Varmanux, famously known as Shaktan Tampuran, was the Maharaja of Kochi, who ruled from 1790 to 1805. Today, he is widely revered as the visionary architect of modern Thrissur. He looked at the dense teak forests surrounding the ancient Vatikamnathan temple and envisioned a modern commercial hub.
He wanted to build a thriving center of culture, finance, and trade.
Exactly.
But as any urban planner will tell you, you can't just clear a forest, lay out some streets, and expect an economy to magically appear. You need merchants. You need people who actually understand the mechanics of building a commercial empire. And according to the historical records, the Maharaja looks right at the Syrian Christians of the surrounding backwaters.
He knew their reputation.
He knew that the people of Enamavu, Olur, and Erumbur had spent centuries mastering the trade networks.
So in 1796, Shaktantampuran makes a highly strategic move. He issues a royal invitation. He specifically asks 52 prominent Christian families from these rural areas to pack up their wealth, their networks, and their expertise and settle right in the heart of the new Thrissur town.
Wait, so the Maharaja basically poached Enamavu's best merchants. I'm trying to wrap my head around the economic impact of that. Wasn't that devastating for the rural parish?
It's a classic textbook example of a localized brain drain driven by rapid urbanization. From a purely demographic standpoint, it was a massive blow to Enamavu. You are taking the 52 wealthiest, most highly educated, tax-paying families out of the village economy overnight.
The capital flight must have been staggering.
Unbelievable. These families took all the commercial knowledge they had built in the flooded coal lands and injected it directly into the new urban center of Thrissur.
And the archives show they were incredibly successful. They laid the literal foundation for the markets of Thrissur. And eventually, in 1814, they used their new wealth to build the Mart Mariam Big Church to serve their migrant community. But surely the people left back in Enamavu must have felt abandoned.
In the short term, perhaps. But from a broader historical perspective, this event elevated Enamavu's legacy to a whole new level.
Wow.
It made this rural parish the silent genetic architect of modern Trissur's immense prosperity. Those original 52 families went on to help build the massive educational and financial institutions that completely define the city today. It's a remarkable example of multi-religious cooperation where Hindu royalty actively fostered an environment for Christian merchants to build a city's prosperity side by side with the local Hindu population.
Enamavu sacrificed its own local wealth to build a regional powerhouse. That is a beautiful way to look at it. It's a story of cultural synthesis, and what I find so fascinating is that you can actually see that synthesis physically written into the stones of the church building in Enamavu today. The sources give us a brilliant architectural breakdown. Just picture this massive edifice standing out over those vast green paddy fields. It is a literal mashup of every single chaotic era we've just talked about.
The architecture is basically a historical timeline you can walk through. You have the ancient Madhubaha, which is the traditional Eastern-style Holy of Holies or sanctuary layout that dates back to their Syriac roots.
Yeah.
But then you look up and you see 17th century Baroque facades and tall towers with Gothic and Romanesque pointed arches.
Those are the physical scars of the Latinization period we talked about.
Yeah.
Portuguese and Carmelite influence literally bolted onto the ancient structure.
Yes, and perfectly integrated into that heavy European architecture are deeply traditional Kerala elements.
What?
The church features a Padapura, which is a traditional ornate wooden gateway entrance you'd normally find in Kerala homesteads. Out front, you'll find large, open-air granite crosses that feature intricate Persian motifs, reflecting their ancient Middle Eastern trade connections. And perhaps most strikingly, standing right on the grounds, you'll find a Deepasamham.
Now, for anyone who hasn't visited southern India, Deepasamham is a tall, tiered stone lamppost, right?
Correct. And it is something you would almost exclusively expect to see in the courtyard of a Hindu temple.
Right.
Having a massive stone Deepasamham illuminating the entrance of an ancient Christian church is an incredibly powerful physical symbol of how deeply this community integrated with the local Hindu culture. They didn't isolate themselves, they absorbed the aesthetic language of their neighbors.
But the text makes it very clear that this building is not just a museum piece for tourists to gawk at. This is a living, breathing community right now. It is currently a vibrant parish operating under the Syro-Malabar Catholic Archdiocese of Thrissur. And the modern data in our sources shows just how active they still are. Today, the parish serves 601 families. To keep things manageable, they are highly organized into 17 different family units across 9 distinct pastoral areas, which function as localized support networks.
The administrative continuity is also quite rigorous. Archival records show a steady succession of dedicated vicars keeping the parish alive. Farathakumpuram Jason was appointed in 2023, following others like Fairnilankaville Francis in 2020. The texts also highlight the pastoral work of Fairchandel Thomas.
And under their guidance, the community maintains a demanding liturgical schedule. This includes a daily holy mass, known in their tradition as the Qurbana, which is typically held bright and early at 6:15 a.m.
6:15 a.m. every day.
Every single day. That is serious dedication to a routine that is centuries old. And it all culminates every July with the massive Enamavu Peronal, their main feast dedicated to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The sources say people flock there from all across the Thrissur district.
It's a massive event.
During the festival, they celebrate the Raza, which is the most solemn form of the Qurbana. They maintain the ancient Syriac chants and use traditional vestments that somehow managed to survive all those centuries of Latinization and book burning. They hold vibrant processions carrying the statue of the Blessed Mother through the streets, complete with traditional Kerala church bands and heavy percussion.
And alongside all of this, they host a novena to St. Anthony, which actually draws people of all faiths, Hindus, Muslims, Christians from the surrounding area.
The Peronal is the perfect encapsulation of their entire 1,500-year history. You have the ancient East Syrian theology, the Roman Catholic administrative structure, and the vibrant local Kerala cultural expressions, all operating harmoniously on a single day.
It really is.
So, what does this all mean? Why does the convoluted history of a single church in a South Indian wetland matter to you listening to this deep dive right now? I think it comes down to a masterclass in human resilience. It shows how a local community can survive and thrive for a millennium and a half. They didn't survive by building giant walls and isolating themselves from the world.
No, they survived through a radical, pragmatic openness to cultural synthesis. Whether they were negotiating with a Hindu king to honor a fallen warrior, or finding a painful but necessary compromise with European missionaries to end a religious rebellion, they constantly adapted. They fiercely protected their core identity, but they were never afraid to evolve when the world around them shifted.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is that historical knowledge is most valuable when we can apply it to our own understanding of the world we walk through every day. This deep dive should challenge you to look differently at the mundane landmarks in your own local community.
Absolutely.
Every old brick building downtown, every foundational wealthy family in your city, every quirky local festival, they're all the result of countless invisible historical forces. Geopolitics, mass migration, brain drain, and cultural assimilation aren't just abstract concepts tracked in academic textbooks. They are the literal physical building blocks of the towns and cities we live in today. You just have to know how to look for those hidden global histories right in your own backyard.
That is such a great takeaway. And before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something that really struck me while we were researching this. We talked extensively about how, back in the 6th century, these early Nazranis mastered those highly complex, ancient hydrological systems to cultivate the flooded coal lands.
Yeah, the terraforming.
They figured out how to build generational wealth in a highly volatile, waterlogged environment that was mostly below sea level. Now zoom out and think about our modern era. We are facing an unprecedented crisis of extreme climate change, rapidly rising sea levels, and catastrophic urban flooding.
It's a huge issue right now.
What forgotten ecological engineering secrets, what ancient sustainable methods of water management might still be buried in the traditions and the muddy soil of those Enamavu coal lands, just waiting to be rediscovered by modern science? It really makes you wonder what the ancient past can still teach us about surviving our own future. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep exploring the hidden histories around you, and we will catch you next time.